Hi, my name's Venora. At Thanksgiving dinner, my sister's little girl looked at my husband and said, "Daddy, can we go home now?" The whole room froze. My champagne glass slipped and shattered, just like the last 9 years of my life. Everyone turned away, pretending nothing happened, while I sat there breaking in silence. But what they didn't know, that silence would one day destroy them. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I want to know. Thanksgiving had always been noisy in my parents' house. Laughter, clinking cutlery, the scent of turkey and cinnamon pies wafting from the kitchen. Yet that year, the warmth felt like a costume draped over something brittle and dangerous. I tried to keep my smile steady, holding the stem of my champagne glass as though it were the only thing keeping me grounded. My sister Aurelia floated through the room like she owned it, every hug from our relatives ending with a compliment about her perfect little family. I stood near the dining table, adjusting the napkin at my place setting. Nobody really looked my way, except to hand me an extra dish or ask me to pass the gravy. My parents hovered around Aurelia, praising how well she'd managed the arrangements. Never mind that I had been there since morning, helping set the table, arranging flowers, and making sure the kitchen didn't collapse under the weight of so many dishes. Tobias, my husband, sat 2 seats away, his arm casually draped along the back of Aurelia's chair as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I told myself not to notice. I told myself it was just the closeness of the holiday table. The laughter quieted as Aurelia's little girl tugged on Tobias's sleeve. She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes and said, clear as day, "Daddy, can we go home now?" Time stopped. And my breath caught so sharply it felt like a knife in my chest. The clinking of forks, the hum of conversation, gone. Every face around that table turned toward me. My champagne glass trembled in my hand before it slipped from my fingers. The crash rang louder than any voice in the room, shards scattering across the hardwood floor like pieces of my life laid bare. I froze. I wanted Tobias to speak, to laugh it off, to correct the child. He didn't. He looked down at his plate, jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. Aurelia's lips curved, just slightly, as she reached for her daughter. Oh, kids say the funniest things, don't they? Her tone carried lightness, but her gaze locked with mine, sharp, almost triumphant. A few guests chuckled nervously. My mother said, "That's children for you," before changing the subject with forced cheer about the pumpkin pie. My father cleared his throat, urging everyone to dig in. The whispers started anyway, low enough to pretend they weren't there, but loud enough for me to hear. Did you hear what she said? Why didn't he correct her? Heat rushed up my neck. I bent to gather the broken pieces, careful not to slice my hand. Nobody moved to help, not even Tobias, not even my parents. I slipped one large shard into my napkin, pressing the cloth tight. It wasn't about the glass anymore. It was about the vow forming in my chest, sharp as the fragment in my hand. If silence was all they offered me tonight, then silence would be the weapon I used against them. I forced a faint smile when Aurelia leaned over and whispered, "She just adores him. Children always know where they feel at home." The words sank like acid, and yet I swallowed them down. Memories tumbled through me. Tobias stepping out late at night, claiming he had work calls. Aurelia's little slips about knowing which cologne he wore. The time my parents insisted Aurelia handle the seating at last year's Christmas dinner while I washed dishes in the kitchen. I had convinced myself I was imagining it. That being the youngest meant being overlooked. That patience and peacekeeping were virtues. But now, with the sting of glass still fresh in my hand, I knew better. I kept my head down as dessert was served, the chatter rising again as though nothing had happened. My parents laughed too loudly, trying to smooth over the tension. Tobias asked Aurelia to pass the whipped cream, his voice steady, practiced. I bit my tongue until I tasted iron, telling myself I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Later, as I folded my napkin, I whispered so low only I could hear, "That night, I decided I would never again sit quietly while they broke me." The next morning, I woke up knowing I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The house was unusually quiet, as though it too carried the weight of last night. I walked into the kitchen barefoot, the tile cool against my skin. The sky outside was gray, a faint drizzle tapping against the window. On the chair beside the table, my champagne-stained dress lay crumpled in a heap. I couldn't bring myself to move it. The stain felt like a scar I wasn't ready to cover. I opened the drawer near the stove and slipped my hand inside. The shard of broken glass I'd hidden was still there, wrapped in a napkin. I pressed my fingers against it, not enough to cut, but enough to remind myself it was real. The silence of the kitchen hummed louder than any words from last night. Tobias shuffled in a few minutes later, hair damp from the shower, his shirt tucked casually into his jeans like it was just another Saturday. He didn't look at me right away, just poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter as though nothing in the world had shifted. "Any plans for breakfast?" he asked lightly, taking a sip. I set my mug down harder than I meant to. The sound echoed through the room. "Tobias," I said, steadying my voice, "did you hear what she said last night?" He didn't flinch. He just glanced at me, shrugged a little, and said, "She's 4, Venora. Kids say things they don't understand. You can't read too much into it." The calmness in his tone burned more than if he'd yelled. My heart thudded in my chest. "You don't think it means anything? Not even something we should talk about?" He shook his head slowly, setting his cup down. "You're being too sensitive. Everyone else laughed it off. Don't turn a child's slip into a scene." A sharp laugh escaped me, though it wasn't from humor. "Too sensitive?" I repeated. "That wasn't just a slip, Tobias. She called you Daddy." "In front of everyone." He sighed, long and measured, like he was dealing with a child himself. "If you keep pushing this, you're going to look paranoid. Is that what you want? For the family to think you've lost it?" His words hit like a cold slap. For a moment, I questioned myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it had been nothing but an innocent mistake. But the knot in my stomach, the same knot I'd ignored for months, twisted tighter. I turned away, pretending to busy myself at the sink, though my mind was racing. Images replayed without mercy. Tobias ending a phone call abruptly the night I walked into the den. Aurelia slipping into his jacket on that family trip, brushing it off with a laugh. "Oh, I was just cold." And the look in his eyes when I asked about it later, the way he changed the subject. Back then, I told myself not to be jealous, not to cause problems. Now, each memory cut deeper, stitching itself into a picture I didn't want to see. I dried my hands on a towel, choosing my next words carefully. "I'm not crazy, Tobias. I know what I heard, and I know what I've been seeing." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you keep talking like this, you're going to destroy what's left of this family. Do you really want that on your shoulders?" That was the moment I realized what he was doing. He wasn't just brushing it off, he was turning it on me, making me feel like the villain for daring to question him. It was subtle, careful, almost rehearsed. I forced a small smile, masking the storm inside me. "You're right," I said softly, though the words tasted bitter. No point making a scene. He seemed relieved, patting my shoulder before heading out to the living room. He probably thought the conversation was over, but as I watched him leave, I slipped the drawer shut over the shard of glass, my secret anchor. If they wanted me quiet, then quiet I would be, but not the kind of quiet that meant surrender. No, I would watch. I would wait, and I would find proof they couldn't laugh away. Sitting at the kitchen table, I let the gray light from outside wash over me. My reflection in the window didn't look weak anymore. It looked steady, determined. I whispered to myself, barely audible. But I wasn't imagining things. And soon, I'd have proof. 2 days later, I stumbled across something I was never meant to see. It was late evening, the kind of night where the house felt too quiet. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I sat in my home office, staring at the glow of my laptop. My desk was cluttered with papers, bills, and a few framed photos I hadn't had the heart to move. I told myself I was there to catch up on work, but the truth was I couldn't shake the unease from Thanksgiving. I reached for my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, when a new post from Aurelia appeared. She'd shared a perfectly curated photo of her living room, the caption bragging about family evenings and thankful hearts. I leaned closer, and that's when my breath caught. On the coffee table, almost out of frame, was Tobias's watch, the one I'd given him last Christmas. Silver band, with a small scratch on the clasp only I would recognize. I froze. My first thought was denial. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Tobias had left it there by mistake during a visit. But deep down, the knot in my stomach told me there were no coincidences left. Trying to steady myself, I turned back to my laptop, telling myself I needed to focus on something else. Tobias's tablet sat charging on the desk, and I needed it synced for a work call he had tomorrow. I opened it, the screen lighting up to reveal a string of notifications. My hands hovered, debating whether to ignore them. Then my eyes caught a name. Aurelia. The messages previewed themselves like tiny daggers. Can't wait until it's just us again. Another one blinked through. Don't let her catch on. My hand trembled as I clicked the thread. The words stared back at me, undeniable, deliberate. Lines and lines of conversations filled with half-truths and secret promises. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I shut the tablet quickly, pressing it against my chest like I could smother the truth if I held it close enough. But the damage was done. Memories flooded in like a cruel slideshow. Aurelia's smirk when she'd leaned too close to Tobias during family dinners. The time she'd said, half-jokingly, "You're lucky he puts up with you." The way Tobias would brush it off, smiling just a little too much. And my parents always watching, always choosing to see Aurelia as the polished, perfect daughter. While I, the peacemaker, the youngest, was told over and over, "Don't make waves, Venora. Keep the peace. That's your role." For years I'd swallowed those words, telling myself being the quiet one was noble, that sacrificing my pride was worth the illusion of family harmony. Now I realized all it had done was make me an easy target. I sank back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. A part of me wanted to scream, to march into the living room and demand the truth right then. But another part, the part that had survived years of being overlooked, knew better. If I confronted them without proof, I'd be dismissed. Again. I wiped a tear from my cheek and pulled the tablet back toward me. My fingers moved quickly, almost without thinking, capturing screenshots of every damning word. I saved them to a hidden folder on my laptop, labeling it with something innocuous, something Tobias would never notice. As I closed the screen, I whispered into the silence, "If silence is what they want, then I'll give them silence, but not the kind they expect." That night, the house was still. Tobias had already gone to bed, and I stayed in the office, staring at the glow of the computer screen. The messages burned in my mind. I realized I wasn't living with the man I thought I knew, or the sister I thought I could tolerate. I was living with strangers. Strangers who shared my blood and my home, and I knew without question that the time for quiet endurance had ended. By the end of the week, the cracks had become impossible to hide, especially when my parents invited us all to Sunday dinner. They had said it so sweetly on the phone. "It's been too long since we had everyone together." But the moment I hung up, I knew. This wasn't their idea. It had Aurelia written all over it. That Sunday afternoon, the house smelled of rosemary and roasted turkey, though Thanksgiving had barely passed. My parents' dining room looked picture-perfect, like something out of a glossy magazine. Polished silverware, wine glasses gleaming under the chandelier, every detail immaculate. It should have felt warm, comforting. Instead, the air was thick with unspoken words. I smoothed the hem of my dress as I walked in, Tobias trailing behind me. He avoided my eyes, as he had all week, offering only polite, distant gestures. Aurelia greeted us at the door, her smile just a touch too wide, her arms wrapped around her daughter as though she were cradling a prize. "Venora," she sang, brushing her cheek against mine. "So glad you could make it." The tone made it clear. She wasn't glad. She was waiting. We sat down at the long table, my parents on either end like proud monarchs presiding over their little kingdom. Aurelia was radiant, leaning close to Tobias as she filled his wineglass before even touching her own. I watched the performance, the way my mother's approving eyes lingered on Aurelia, while my father cleared his throat and asked Tobias about his latest work project, never once turning the question toward me. I forced myself to stay still, to appear calm, though my stomach twisted. Halfway through the meal, while conversation buzzed about trivial things, Aurelia's little girl suddenly piped up, her voice clear and innocent. "Daddy always tucks me in first when you're not there." The room froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth, my hand stiff. Every head turned toward the child, then toward Tobias. He coughed, fiddling with his napkin. Aurelia's smile faltered just a second before she forced a laugh. "Oh, kids," she said lightly, her voice smooth. "They pick up on the funniest things." She glanced at Tobias, and in that moment, I caught it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't speak. Instead, I forced a smile, pretending the comment hadn't cut me in two. My parents shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable, but not enough to question it. They quickly steered the conversation back to weather and holidays, as though nothing had been said. Inside, I was burning. But I remembered my decision. Let them think I was blind. Let them believe my silence was weakness. Later, as dishes were being cleared, I slipped into the kitchen to catch my breath. The clatter of silverware and polite laughter echoed from the dining room. I was rinsing a plate when I felt her beside me. Aurelia leaned in, her perfume sharp, her smile thin. Her voice was low, meant only for me. "You were always the fragile one," she whispered. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight." I clenched my jaw so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. My fingers tightened around the plate, but I set it down gently, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Finally, I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. "Fragile things break differently," I murmured. For the first time that night, I saw her mask slip, just a flicker. I slid my phone deeper into my pocket where it had quietly recorded her words. And the child's. The evidence was stacking higher. They thought I was silent out of weakness. They were wrong. By dessert, I wasn't wondering anymore if they were betraying me. I was deciding how to make them regret it. And 2 days later, I made the call that would set everything in motion. The house was too quiet that evening, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you feel like you can't breathe. Tobias had gone about his day as though nothing had happened at Sunday dinner. He hummed while shaving that morning, smiled faintly as he poured his coffee, and talked about his workload like we hadn't just sat through the most gut-wrenching family meal of my life. But I couldn't escape the echo of Aurelia's little girl's words. "Daddy always tucks me in first when you're not there." That phrase kept looping in my head until it felt carved into my bones. I sat at my desk in the home office, the glow of my lamp falling across unopened mail and a stack of untouched work files. My dress from that night was still draped over a chair, faint traces of wine along the hem like a stain I couldn't scrub from my soul. And in the top drawer, wrapped in a folded napkin, was the jagged shard of champagne glass from Thanksgiving. I touched it lightly, the edge sharp under my fingertip, my private reminder of when everything started to shatter. Tobias was in the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door. My pulse raced as I picked up his phone from the nightstand. My hands trembled so badly I had to steady myself against the wall before unlocking it. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I was searching for the truth that had been dangling in front of me for too long. It didn't take long. Under the name Mark Jenkins Accounts was a message thread that made my stomach drop. The first line glared at me. "Can't wait until it's just us again." My eyes darted down the thread. More messages, little jokes, coded phrases that weren't nearly as clever as they thought. And then a photo. Aurelia's daughter holding Tobias's hand, their fingers intertwined like family. The timestamp was from a night Tobias claimed to be working late. I felt bile rise in my throat. For a split second, I wanted to storm into the bathroom, fling the phone at him, demand he explain. But then Aurelia's whisper from the kitchen replayed in my mind. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight." She wanted me to break. She wanted me to crumble in front of them all. Not this time. Instead, I carefully forwarded the messages and photo to my own email, saving them like bricks in a wall I was quietly building. I placed the phone back exactly as I'd found it, then walked calmly into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. When Tobias stepped out later, toweling his hair, I smiled faintly, as though nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek absently, and I almost laughed at the casualness of it all. But that night, after he fell asleep, I pulled out the champagne shard again. Its edges caught the light as I whispered to myself. This was the night my world broke. And the night I decided to fight. The next morning, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Claire?" I said softly when she answered. "It's Venora. I need help." Claire had been a friend from college, one of the few people who ever told me I wasn't weak. She was a lawyer now, working in Chicago. As I explained what had happened, my voice steady but low, she listened without interruption. Finally, she said, "Venora, you need more proof. Don't confront him yet, and don't let them corner you into looking unstable. Build your case carefully, quietly. You can win this, but not if you rush." Her words lit something inside me. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of control. I thanked her, promising to keep her updated, and hung up. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of everything pressing down, but instead of breaking me, it hardened me. I realized then I would not scream or beg. I wouldn't even argue. I would let them think I was silent. And in that silence, I would gather everything I needed. They thought I'd stay quiet forever. They had no idea I'd already chosen my battlefield. And that night, I set my first trap and waited for one of them to step into it. A week had passed since Thanksgiving, though it felt like years. My life had split cleanly in two, before the champagne glass slipped from my hand and after. Now, everything I did was calculated, every smile rehearsed, every silence sharpened. That Sunday, Tobias and I were expected at a smaller family brunch hosted by one of my aunts. It was supposed to be casual, just the cousins, as my mother had said over the phone, her voice too cheerful to be real. I knew Aurelia had arranged it. She wanted another stage, another chance to play the role of the flawless daughter while quietly twisting the knife deeper into me. When we walked in, the house smelled of cinnamon rolls and bacon. Laughter bubbled from the dining room, too loud, too bright. I wore a navy sweater and a steady smile, clutching my purse a little tighter than usual. Tobias, as always, slipped easily into the chatter, shaking hands, hugging cousins, kissing cheeks. Aurelia arrived fashionably late, her little girl perched on her hip, her hair done in a neat braid. Aurelia's lipstick was perfect, her dress carefully chosen. She looked like she had walked straight out of a lifestyle magazine. The moment she saw Tobias, her face lit up just a little too much. I caught it. I stayed quiet, watching. My pulse didn't quicken. Not anymore. I'd learned that silence could be a weapon sharper than any scream. During the meal, conversations overlapped. Football, holiday plans, neighborhood gossip. I placed my purse on the chair beside Tobias, the phone inside recording with the screen dark. I ate little, listening more than speaking. At one point, Aurelia leaned across the table, passing Tobias a plate of pastries. Her smile lingered, her voice soft enough for others to miss, but not me. "He calls you Mommy," she said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "But you're not the one raising him." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression calm, my eyes fixed on the fork in my hand. Tobias chuckled nervously, avoiding my gaze. I let the moment pass, though inside I memorized every syllable. The phone in my purse had caught it. That tiny device had just sealed the first crack in the armor they thought would never break. Excusing myself, I slipped down the hallway and pulled out my phone. My lawyer friend, Claire, responded almost immediately when I sent her the recording. "Good. Keep stacking the deck. They'll hang themselves if you stay patient." Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. Back at the table, Aurelia pushed her luck further. She handed Tobias a glass of juice, smiling as if they shared a private joke. "Just like old times, huh?" Tobias laughed, but it was tight, strained. For a fleeting second, guilt flashed across his face before he looked away. That second was enough. I lifted my glass of water, meeting Aurelia's eyes across the table. My voice was calm, almost casual. "To truth," I said softly, the words sliding through the air like a blade. "It always finds its way out." The table fell silent for a beat too long. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Aurelia's smile faltered just enough for me to see the crack beneath. I reached into my purse and brushed my fingers against the shard of champagne glass I kept hidden there. Cold, sharp, a reminder of the night my world had splintered. "You shattered me once. But now," I thought, "I'll make sure the pieces cut where they should." As the brunch wound down, I kept my composure. I hugged relatives, thanked my aunt, and even kissed Aurelia's cheek before leaving, her perfume cloying and false. Tobias walked beside me, his hand brushing mine as though nothing was wrong. But I knew better. They thought I was still the naive little sister who'd smile through anything, the one who'd rather keep peace than speak truth. But I'd just recorded the first proof that could destroy them both. What I didn't expect was how vicious their counterattack would be, and how close I'd come to losing everything. It was 2 weeks after Thanksgiving when the knock came. The sound was sharp, urgent, the kind that made your stomach drop before you even opened the door. I pulled it open to find a man in a pressed suit holding a folder with my name typed neatly across the front. "Venora?" he asked. I nodded, already knowing this wasn't going to be good. He handed me the envelope and said, "You've been served." Then he turned and walked away without another word. Inside, my hands trembled as I unfolded the papers. Custody. They were filing for custody of Aurelia's child. On what grounds? That I was unstable, emotionally volatile, and unfit to be around the child. My knees nearly gave out. I grabbed the counter for support as the words blurred before me. I wasn't her mother, but I had cared for her niece, her child, countless times when Aurelia was too busy or Tobias had work emergencies. And now they were twisting it into something sinister. They'd painted me as a jealous, obsessive woman trying to steal what wasn't mine. The walls of my home felt like they were closing in. By that evening, the whispers had already begun. A cousin called, her tone falsely sweet, asking if I was doing okay. Another message from an aunt read, "Maybe take some time for yourself, honey. You seem stressed." They were working fast. Aurelia knew exactly how to seed doubt. At Sunday dinner, the silence was heavier than the food on the table. My father asked Tobias about work, not looking at me once. My mother poured wine, her eyes sliding away whenever I tried to meet them. Aurelia leaned forward, voice dripping with false concern. "Venora, maybe you should think about talking to someone. You've been under a lot of pressure lately." The implication was clear. I wasn't stable. I looked at Tobias, silently begging for him to say something. Anything. He avoided my gaze, slicing into his steak like the conversation had nothing to do with him. That moment nearly broke me. But then, Aurelia smiled, too confident, too certain of her victory. And it hit me. Arrogance was her weakness. I started to notice the cracks. The fake emails she'd presented had little inconsistencies, timestamps that didn't match, phrases Tobias would never use. She was sloppy because she thought I was finished. That night I called Claire. She listened quietly as I read the documents aloud, my voice steadying with each word. "Venora," she said finally, "if you push now, you can break them. I just need one more undeniable piece of proof. Don't stop now." Her words lit something inside me I thought had died weeks ago. After we hung up, I sat in my office, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened the drawer and took out the shard of glass I'd kept from Thanksgiving night. Cold and sharp, it caught the lamplight. "You broke me," I whispered, tracing the edge with my finger. "But you'll cut yourselves this time." I slipped the shard back into the drawer, closed my eyes, and let the plan form in my mind. I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't beg, and I certainly wouldn't play the victim they wanted me to be. No, I would let them keep digging their own grave, and when the moment came, I would pull the rug out from under both of them in front of everyone who mattered. They thought their lies had buried me, but I had already decided. Their reckoning would not be behind closed doors. The day of the reckoning came faster than anyone expected, and I made sure the whole town was watching. That December morning, the courthouse steps were crowded. Neighbors, extended relatives, even people from church huddled in scarves and coats, their breath visible in the icy air. I pulled mine tighter around me, the shard of champagne glass tucked safely in my coat pocket. It pressed against my palm like a reminder. Today, silence would no longer be my shield. It would be my weapon. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low whispers. Heads turned as I walked down the aisle. Some looked at me with pity, others with doubt. I kept my chin high, though my stomach twisted in knots. Tobias sat at the front, pale and fidgeting, while Aurelia perched next to him, radiant with smugness. She caught my eye and smirked like victory was already hers. The hearing began. The judge called for order, his voice echoing through the room. Aurelia's lawyer stood, polished and smooth, and presented a stack of glossy photographs. "Your Honor," he said, "these photos clearly demonstrate inappropriate closeness between Venora and Tobias. They suggest an unhealthy attachment and support our petition that Venora is unfit to remain in this child's life." Gasps rippled through the room as the photos flashed across the screen. They had been doctored, me leaning too close, Tobias's hand edited on my shoulder, smiles captured at angles meant to tell a lie. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Aurelia feigned a sorrowful look, tilting her head like she pitied me. "It breaks my heart," she whispered loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "But she needs help." Even Tobias shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and the images. For a moment, I wondered if he believed them too. I could have stood and shouted, I could have begged, explained, defended, but I didn't. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my expression calm, my silence louder than any protest. Let Aurelia soak in her triumph. Arrogance always leaves the door open. The judge turned to my lawyer. "Do you have anything to present?" Claire rose, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to enter into evidence a recording from the night of Thanksgiving dinner." I saw Aurelia's face falter for the first time, her lips pressed into a thin line. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then the voice of a child rang out. "Daddy, can we go home now?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Aurelia's own voice, sharp, panicked, desperate. "Keep quiet. Don't ruin this for me." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping as people leaned in closer. My heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the shift I felt in the air. Aurelia's smirk had vanished, replaced with the color draining from her cheeks. Before she could regain her composure, a voice rose from the gallery. It was my cousin Emily, standing tall with her hand trembling, but her voice clear. "Your Honor, I can confirm what you just heard. Aurelia told me weeks ago she was seeing Tobias. She laughed about how she'd finally take what Venora didn't deserve. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But not anymore." The judge's gavel struck the bench sharply. "Order." Tobias's head dropped into his hands. When the judge demanded he answer, he finally looked up, sweat glistening at his temples. His voice cracked. "It's true," he admitted. "Aurelia told me if I didn't go along, I'd never see my daughter again." A collective gasp rippled across the room. My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from the vindication I had been waiting for. The judge leaned forward, his voice stern. "The evidence is clear. Temporary custody leverage is revoked. Mr. Tobias, you are placed on supervised visitation pending investigation. Mrs. Aurelia, your credibility is severely compromised. This court will not tolerate manipulation of evidence." Aurelia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the shard of champagne glass. Quietly, I slid it across the table toward Aurelia. She stared at it, confused, as I whispered with a calm smile, "Careful. It cuts deeper than you think." The gavel struck again, ending the session. But I knew this wasn't the end. Justice had been served in that room, but I could feel in my bones it was only the beginning. Justice wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of taking back everything they'd stolen from me. When I walked out of that courthouse, the cold winter air hit me. But for the first time in years, I could finally breathe. A week later, the snow had softened everything outside. The world looked quiet, blanketed in white, like it was offering me a fresh start. My house was still. No echoes of shouting, no sharp words hanging in the air, only the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the settling wood. I wrapped myself in a wool blanket and sat by the window, watching flakes drift slowly to the ground. The days after the verdict had been filled with whispers. At the grocery store, women who once looked through me now paused and offered small, awkward nods. Neighbors who had repeated Aurelia's lies now dropped their eyes when we passed. Even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years called to check in, their voices heavy with guilt. I didn't bother with speeches or explanations. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the talking for me. I focused instead on the quiet, on reclaiming my peace. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like a prison. It felt like freedom. One evening there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Tobias standing there. No flowers, no smug smile, just a man who looked like he'd been hollowed out. His hands trembled as he shoved them deep into his coat pockets. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered, his voice raw. "But thank you. Thank you for not letting her destroy me completely." I studied his face, the face I'd once trusted with everything. He looked smaller somehow, like the lies had drained the very life out of him. I gave a small nod. That was all. Then I pulled the door closed softly, the latch clicking into place. The boundary was set in stone. I hadn't needed to shout. Closing that door was louder than any argument I could have made. Word spread quickly that Aurelia had packed up and left the state. Her reputation was in ruins. The businesses she'd flaunted online collapsed under scrutiny. Friends she used to brag about vanished from her side. Her social media accounts, once bursting with perfect photos and staged smiles, went dark overnight. And yet, as I read the news and heard the whispers, I felt no triumph, no gloating, just quiet release, as if a storm had finally passed. A few days later, at the community center, I saw Aurelia's little girl. She was coloring at a low table, her tiny feet swinging above the floor. When she noticed me, her eyes lit up. She ran over and tugged on my hand. "Do you still have the sparkly cup?" she asked, her voice innocent and bright. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "I don't need it anymore." She smiled, satisfied with the answer, and skipped back to her crayons. My chest ached, not from anger this time, but from tenderness. She was just a child, untouched by the bitterness of the adults around her. And maybe, just maybe, she would never know the full weight of what had happened. That night, back home, I opened the drawer where I'd kept the shard of the champagne glass. I held it one last time, its edges still sharp, still capable of cutting. Then I placed it into a memory box, closing the lid firmly. It no longer symbolized my pain. It was proof of my survival. As the snow fell heavier outside, I sat quietly and let the silence wrap around me. Not the silence of being ignored. Not the silence of being erased. This was my silence. Chosen, strong, unbreakable. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any scream. I didn't win back their love. I didn't need to. I won back myself. Do you think I was too cold? Or was it the only way left to stay whole?